You know, I'm right. Nick Durst here with Joe Calabrese, and Joe, I think it's safe for me to say that you were very excited for our guest here today.
Yes, I'm very excited, and it's somebody who, once again, goes along with our New York Post theme that we've been having the past couple of weeks. I'm a huge Jets fan, so this guest, very, very excited to have him on, get to pick his brain, get to go back in time and ask him some questions and see how he got to where he is right now. Very excited to have him on. He is the longtime Jets beat writer for the New York Post, Brian Costello. Brian, welcome to the show. How you doing today?
I'm good. I'm sorry that you've had to suffer through Jets fandom, Joe.
It's all right. No big
It's a
deal.
rough life. It's a rough life.
It is. Somebody's got to do it.
I get paid to watch the games, so I can't imagine having to watch some of these games when you're not getting paid.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's been past couple of years have not been so good. But I mean, we've had some good years during the 2000s and when I was younger. So hopefully we'll get to that. We'll get to ask you questions about that and the rest of your career as we go through this episode. But thanks again for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Brian, do you think you'll ever see an off season again where you don't have to cover a managerial or head coach search? 3 years in a row, right?
Well, yeah. Well, last year there was no change, right? Because it was 2 years ago. It was weird. It was the coach and then the GM in June. So last year there was no change. The one that really has me floored is I kind of thought I was going to have a run where I wouldn't have to deal with quarterback questions
Right.
for a while. Because that was when I came on the beat, Sanchez was the quarterback, and probably the first year I was on the beat was 2011, and Sanchez was pretty much entrenched as the starter. They just gone to 2 championship games, but then he had a shaky season, and then there was a question in 2012, like would he be the quarterback? They trade for Tebow. There was Peyton Manning talk. Then they dropped Geno, so then you went through that. Then the uncertainty with Fitz and McCown. And so then when they drafted Sam Darnold, I'm like, all right, this is going to be the guy. Like I always tease Paul Schwartz, who I think was on your show, covers the Giants, that I'm like, he had Eli Manning. I'm like, how hard is that? Like, what do you do in training camp? Because all we ever did in training camp was, oh, in 7-on-7s today, this quarterback did this quarterback did that. And I'm like, I could cover the Giants. Eli, you never have to worry about the quarterbacks. So I thought I was going to have a nice run where Sam was going to be the quarterback. And now here we are where quarterback is the number one topic on the table, I think.
So I want to ask, since we're on the topic of quarterbacks, Sanchez, 2 straight AFC championship games. He's got to be in the top 5 list of the quarterbacks in franchise history now. I mean, how many of these quarterbacks in the last 10 years make that list?
How many?
Right, at least 1 or 2 of them now.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the end of the question.
No, I was asking what the top 5 quarterbacks in franchise history. You got to put Sanchez up there, right? I mean,
yeah. Sanchez is on there, but I mean, it's a pretty rough list. I mean, obviously you have Namath, and then you have debates.
Testaverde, Pennington,
right?
Kenny O'Brien, I think would be on the list. Pennington, Vinny's a tough one because Vinny had a really good run, but it was short run. The same with Sanchez. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of debate. After the top, couple, it's hard to come up with guys that you're debating. I like to look at the top 10 list of like yards and things like that for the Jets and tweet it out every once in a while because it's pretty bad. Like Fitz is like 8th or something like that, an all-time yard. And like Sam is in the list now, and like it's like these guys barely were here. So it's not a great list.
No doubt about it. A lot of changing parts, and ever since the Brett Favre crazy year, it's been nonstop Jets quarterback rumors, and it continues this offseason. We'll get to that. But Brian, wanted to know, when did you decide that you wanted to pursue a career in journalism?
Probably when I was in high school, I figured it out. I like a lot of people, I loved sports, and I figured out at some point that my career wasn't going to be playing sports. I wasn't good enough. So I started looking at other avenues, and I liked writing. I was much better at English in school than I was at math or science. So I started thinking about journalism then. I don't think I knew exactly what I wanted to do, if I wanted to do TV or something like that. And then in college, I really kind of fell in love with writing at the newspaper. And I went to Penn State, and Penn State is a really good student newspaper that's turned out a lot of people. And I went there and really kind of fell in love with it there.
Yeah. So when you were there, were there any other like internship programs that you were able to partake in and stuff like that? Because we've had a lot of Syracuse grads on. We've had a couple of Maryland grads on, and obviously those programs are more known for their journalism.
Yeah.
But I mean, I had friends who I grew up with who went to Penn State, who I'm still very, very close with today. So what was the internship experience like, and what kind of connections did you have in college that you were able to use as soon as you graduated to get back out into the real world?
Yeah, so I did an internship when I was a sophomore. I actually originally went to Purdue University, and I transferred to Penn State. And when you transfer to Penn State, I had to go to a satellite campus. I couldn't go to University Park, so I went to Penn State Hazleton as a sophomore. While I was there, I did an internship with the Times Leader of Wilkes-Barre. I was in their Hazleton bureau, and so I did high schools for them for a semester. And then after my junior year, I had an internship. I'm from New Jersey. I had an internship at the Daily Record in Parsippany, which was my local paper, and I interned for them. And then, I met the guy at the Daily Record who he first was a columnist, then became a sports editor while I was there, Mike Battaglino, and I worked with him at a few different places, including the Post. He's the one who brought me to the Post. So, that was a very key connection that I made there working with him, and Mike's a good friend of mine.
He's a good friend of mine too.
What's that?
He's a good friend of mine too. I know him all too well.
There you go. So
yeah.
So Mike was very, very helpful for me getting to, get to where I am now. And out of college, I went to a paper in Virginia, the Daily News Record in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and I covered James Madison University there for a year, and I had a great sports editor there, Chris Simmons, and a lot of people have come from that paper. And then I came back up to work for Mike at the Daily Record, and then gone from there.
Yeah, so I do freelance work for kind of NHL.com and MLB.com. Yep. So Mike has been with NHL.com now for the past couple of years, and I was an intern there in 2016. That's when I first met him. He was there at the website. He's still there now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we have connections there through NHL.com, and Bill Price, who is the editor in chief of NHL.com. He came over from, I believe it was the Daily News. Yeah, so he's got experiences with the New York paper. So there's that strong connection there. I believe David Satriano, who also writes for NHL.com, was at the Post with you, I believe.
And when my first job at the Post was in 2000 with Mike, we had a magazine called Sports Week. And it was separate from the Post. It was sold on newsstands. It only lasted less than a year, but it was a great product. And Brian Compton, who works for NHL.com,
yep,
Brian and I were
buddies all too well.
The two clerks at Sports Week. And that was a fantastic job. And Mike was an assistant editor at that. And that was probably the most fun I've ever had at a job. Was at Sports Week.
Brian, what other on your journey up till getting the jet ski, what other teams or sports did you cover throughout your career?
Yeah, so I worked for Sports Week, and I got laid off when it closed. So I was like, I tell in this business you're going to get laid off at some point. And I was lucky. I was 25 years old, and so I was able to I didn't have any kids at that point. I wasn't married. I was able to figure things out. I went to work for the Herald News in New Jersey. I became sports editor at Herald News in New Jersey, and then a job came at the Post in 2004 for a long form features writer. And so I took that job. They were kind of expanding their Sunday section, and I went back to work for that. So I did everything basically from 2004. I was doing features on all different sports. I was traveling around doing everything. And then when the steroid story broke in baseball in 2005, they kind of put me on that. So I was in the room when McGuire said, I'm not here to talk about the past. I covered that. I covered the Clemens stuff, the Mitchell report. So I did a lot of baseball. Right. I've done 3 Olympics. I was an Olympics reporter in Torino, Beijing, and Vancouver. So I was kind of a jack of all trades for a while. Then I was just doing the Yankees for a while. I was the number 2 guy in the Yankees, and then the Jets beat came along in 2011.
Awesome stuff. And you get on the beat, and it's crazy time in Jets history. You're synonymous with the Jets now. Do you miss baseball at all?
I do. I think baseball. There's good and bad at baseball is that it's every day. So like there's always something to write about with baseball. There's always something happening. Where sometimes with football during the season, you get to like a Thursday and you're like, okay, what am I gonna write? Because you kind of dissected the game Monday, Tuesday. You may have written the news of the day. Wednesday might be the quarterback or the coach, but by Thursday you're kind of going. There's some weeks, especially when it's not a very eventful season, where you're like, all right, what am I going to write now? Baseball's never like that. There's always something happening in baseball, so I kind of miss that. But baseball is also a grind because it's every single day. It's a rougher lifestyle than football. Covering football is a much easier life if you have a family, which I have 2 kids. So I don't have 10-game road trips in football. But there's aspects of baseball I do miss, and I miss too, like when I was doing every sport and bouncing around. That's fun because like you're never doing the same thing. You're kind of just bouncing around to every different thing. You don't become an expert in anything, but you sort of you get to get a little taste of all the different teams in New York, which can be fun.
So do you still have your Hall of Fame vote?
I do still have my Hall of Fame vote. I am an honorary member of the BBWA now. A few years ago, I don't have an active card anymore, but so you still keep it. And what happens is every August, I guess it is, you get like a survey from them, and they ask you a few questions about how many games you've covered and stuff like that, and they make a decision about whether you keep your vote. Now, typically, I do a few baseball games between April and June. I like doing it. The Post can use me on it. They need people to fill in it here and there. So but last year I didn't do any because it was obviously an odd season. But usually I do that. Yeah, so I've kept my vote, and I'll probably give it up. I know Carton went after me about this a few weeks ago, but I told Evan, I talked to Evan about it off the air. I'm like, I'll give it up when I look at that ballot and there's guys that I didn't cover on that ballot. But right now the ballot is pretty much guys who the majority of their career was in the 2000s, which is when I covered baseball. There's guys who might have played 3 or 4 years after I left, but the prime of their career. If I'm voting on Barry Bonds, like I said to you, I covered the Star thing. I also did the Bonds. I did 2 years of Barry Bonds coverage, where I was with him for the summer when he was chasing first Babe Ruth and then Hank Aaron. I spent the summer following him in 2006 and 2007. So I've covered Barry Bonds more than most of the people voting for the Hall of Fame, I'm going to guess, other than the guys who were in San Francisco and the other guys who did the Bonds chase with me. So I feel pretty confident that I know a lot about him. And even, I was looking, A-Rod becomes a candidate next year. I covered a lot of A-Rod between 2004 and 2011 with the Yankees. So I still feel like, the guys on the ballot are guys who were playing in their primes while I was covering baseball. But once, if when it gets to the point where there's guys on there that I didn't really cover, I will give up my ballot, or they'll take it from me. They can take it from me at any point.
Yeah, so we wanted to ask you this because you have a special connection to it that a lot of writers don't necessarily have. So through the years, have you ever found difficulty filling out your Hall of Fame ballot? Because I think we've reached the point now where a lot of what we see, how the writers and journalists come to the decision to fill out their ballot. I wouldn't say there's a huge disconnect, but I mean, there is somewhat of a disconnect between fans and writers. And because you had the opportunity to cover something that, you said it yourself, not a lot of baseball writers, even had the privilege of covering. We see a lot of writers have Barry Bonds and guys like Roger Clemens on their ballots, right? And we see guys have guys like Kurt Schilling on their ballots who have stirred up controversy in other areas of their lives, and a lot of people see that as a way of not necessarily voting for that person. because the integrity portion of the Hall of Fame vote comes into play. So have you found difficulty in justifying your Hall of Fame votes through the years? Do you do it more based on personal preference, on the professional experience, and with all the stuff that you covered? Is it a combination of both? I'm very curious.
Yeah, so I actually have a copy of my ballot here.
Wow.
Oh,
How about that?
It's right here. So it's like, this is a copy. I obviously mailed my ballot in, but I always make a copy to keep it, and I keep it in a file because I think, this is one of the greatest honors I've ever had professionally, is voting for the Hall of Fame. I take it very seriously. So I vote for Bonds and Clemens every year. I vote for Schilling. I'm not sure if I voted for him every single year, but I voted for him for a long time now. Yeah, I struggle with the integrity clause, and I'll tell you why. I think in my experiences, just in general, the people whose integrity that I can vouch for are the people like, my mom and dad, my wife. Not very far from there, right? Because like I've had friends that I found out things that disappointed me that they did in their personal life. I've had relatives who've done things that disappointed me, and I guess that kind of falls in the integrity category. And I look at players, and there's a lot of guys that I cover on the Yankees. I knew they were cheating on their wives. Like, is that integrity?
Right.
Is that worse than steroids? Now, there's an argument that doesn't do anything on the field. Steroids did something on the field, which I understand that. And the other problem I have with the integrity clause is it's only used as a negative. Like a guy like Lance Berkman, right? Lance Berkman was one of the nicest guys I ever covered and seemed like a genuinely good guy. Should I give him extra credit because he was a really good guy and vote him for the Hall of Fame because he was a borderline, I don't think he's a Hall of Fame player, but he was a very good player who was a great guy. Torrey Hunter is another guy like that. Was a great guy. Does he get points for that? No, I think we only use the integrity to detract. So that I have issues with the integrity clause. I have a tough time wrapping my brain around it. I think the steroids era is part of baseball, and there's a lot of dark eras in baseball. There's a lot of things that happen. There's a lot of people in there that are not great guys and did things. So I vote for those guys. But I do think the system for voting for baseball is a great system. There's over 400 voters. You take 75% of us to get elected. That's a tough standard to hit. And everyone has a different philosophy. And I think that's good. I think it kind of balances itself out. Some people might look at my philosophy and say, I'm an idiot for voting for Manny Ramirez. Like he got caught doing it. I know like my colleague Joel Sherman, he won't vote for Sammy Sosa, but he votes for Bonds and Clemens because he feels like they were Hall of Famers before they started using steroids. He feels Sosa was a product of steroids. I think that's fine, that philosophy. I think it's good that we have all these different voices and different philosophies. And I think in the end, the right people usually end up in the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
Bonds and Clemens is going to be a tough one. I'm interested to see what happens next year with them.
Right. Plus, A-Rod and Ortiz on the ballot next year. So it's good.
Next year provides a very interesting conundrum because I think the writers are going to lean towards putting a guy like David Ortiz in, but not so for Alex Rodriguez, which I think makes sense because A-Rod has multiple strikes. Yeah. I think if the writers in their mind say, we think he's a great player, we think he was a great player before steroids or before he got caught, but because of the actual positive test and because of what he did, if we need to feel obligated to keep him out of the Hall of Fame for a couple of years, you want to take away the first ballot privileges away from a player. I think that kind of makes sense as well. But I mean, next year, if Bonds and Clemens don't get in, and if David Ortiz gets in, and David Ortiz was in the Mitchell report, that's a huge problem for them.
David Ortiz was not in the Mitchell report, by my memory, by the way. I've heard people say that. I could double check that, but what David Ortiz was in was the New York Times reported that Ortiz had failed the test in 2003, which is when they did survey testing. They did anonymous survey testing to see how many guys would fail. If they hit a certain threshold, they were going to introduce testing the following year. We never found out who tested positive, but there was this list out there of guys. And someone gave me the list at one point. I was never able to verify whether it was the right list or not. The New York Times reported Ortiz was on that list. Ortiz denied it. That's really the only solid evidence that Ortiz did steroids. So I could double check the Mitchell report. I probably have it back there somewhere. But I don't think he was in the Mitchell report, but that he was linked to steroids, and he had a weird career where all of a sudden he became a great player, later in his career. So I understand the suspicion there, but it's tough. Like a guy like Mike Piazza was tough. You always heard Mike Piazza did steroids, but Mike Piazza was never caught. He was never involved in any of the investigations. He was never in the Mitchell report. So, Ivan Rodriguez, the same thing. He was suspected. So it's a tough one. But I think the Hall of Fame has said, you can't vote for Pete Rose, you can't vote for Joe Jackson. Like they've ruled those guys out. They didn't rule out Barry Bonds or Roger Clemens.
Right.
So I think we can vote for them.
Yeah, only time will tell, and next year will be a big year with the ballots. Now, you mentioned earlier Carton and Roberts. How did the Wfan opportunity come about for you?
Yeah, so I started. I don't know. I started going on with Joe and Evan probably early on when I was on the beat, and they had me on a lot. And I've been on other shows too, but it was mainly Joe and Evan. I was on a lot, and then, oh gosh, I can't remember what year it was. If it was 2018, maybe somewhere in there. Chris Lepresti, who had been covering the Jets for them, he didn't want to do it anymore, so he stepped down. And I just contacted Mark Chernoff at FAN, and I said, I'm on your station a lot anyway. I was like, instead of, hiring someone to cover the Jets, it seemed like it was a difficult thing for them. I said, you could hire me, and I could do the Jets, and the Post was okay with it. So that was how that came about. I think it's worked out pretty well. I enjoy going on there. I enjoy doing the radio stuff.
What was your favorite? What was your favorite part about going on with Joe and Evan after a big Jets loss?
I don't know if there was a favorite part. I mean, it was always just what Joe would come up with to yell at me about. I always found it funny. Like I'm critical of the Jets when they lose. I have no problem being critical of the Jets. But somehow I always ended up kind of being the defender of the Jets with those guys because they would just go so crazy, especially Joe. It just goes so crazy and over the top that I felt like I would end up defending them, or defending a coach or whatever, just because he wanted Adam Gase fired. I think 4 games into his first season, he was ready to fire him, and even he wanted Todd Bowles fired. I remember after they lost in Buffalo in 2015, he was ready to fire him, and they just went 10-6. So, it was always kind of trying to talk Joe off the ledge was the fun part of that.
The best part about Joe with Jets would be that every time the Jets hired a head coach or a GM, he would say, all right, 3 years from now, we'll be back to do it again. So, that was the time usually right.
I made him scream because I guess this is probably halfway through the 2019 season when there was a lot of people that wanted Gase fired. And I was saying, you can't fire a head coach in the middle of his first season. And Joe said, is Gase going to be the coach in 4 years? And I said, no. I'm like, and he started screaming. He just started screaming out loud. And I said, there was no chance. Like I could tell then Gase didn't have a chance with the fan base. They hated him. I'm like, he's going to be gone. He will not be here in 4 years, Joe.
Yeah, Jets fans can get pretty wild. What would you say is the worst part about interacting with Jets fans on Twitter?
Just the nastiness, and I actually interact much less than I used to. It's kind of unfortunate, but it gets to a point where you're a human being, and when they're just attacking, like it would put me in I'd get mad. I'd be in a bad mood and then I'd be in a bad mood in my house with my kids, and I'm like, what am I doing? So right. I pulled back. I have my replies and mentions, like I can only see the ones of people I follow unless I seek them out, but if I look at my phone and click on replies, it's only people I follow on Twitter, because it just became too much, and the negative stuff just kind of outweighed the positive stuff. I liked interacting with fans, and I try to answer my emails if people are respectful and email me, and I think there's other posters trying to come up with other ways for us to interact with fans. During the pandemic, if people put their phone number in their email, I called a few people.
Wow.
Yeah, because I appreciate it. The reason I have a job is because of Jets fans, right? So I fully appreciate that. Twitter has just become a sewer, though, and there's just no, people forget anyone's a human being on it, and it's just attack.
So the next question I have for you, we've asked many of your colleagues at the Post, and it is, how do you in this business toe the line between wanting to tweet something out to be credited first versus getting it up on the post to get it on .com to get the clicks?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's a balance. I think, if you know you have it and no one else is going to have it, then you can put it online and you're fine. If it's transactional, like it's a signing or a trade, I think you have to tweet it because someone else is going to get that quickly. Now, like I had the Jamal Adams trade last summer, and that one was one where I sort of middled it. I caught wind that he was being traded a little before I was able to report it, and my source said, just hold off a little bit just to make sure that it goes through, and then I'll give you the go ahead once the trade, once I know that for sure that he's being traded. So I wrote a story. I had a story written, done. I didn't know what team it was or any of the parameters. So I just kind of wrote, a lot of the backstory and stuff. And then when I was told he had been traded to the Seahawks, I tweeted it out, but I also simultaneously emailed the story in and had the story ready to go. And I had alerted a web editor, like, hey, I got something, that's coming, so be ready. And so we were able to publish it fairly quickly, so like within a couple of minutes of when I tweeted it. So, I knew that was going to be confirmed, but, I had an interview with Muhammad Wilkerson when he was looking for a contract, whenever that was, 2016, that I knew no one else was getting. So we actually held that for the newspaper. That's probably the last time I'll ever do that. Like that, we didn't post that online or anything. They waited. They published it in the newspaper in the morning, but I knew no one else was getting him. So that's the key to me, is just like, you have it alone and no one else is going to get it, which any transaction people are going to get. So that's hard to do that.
Right. That's a really, really good example, actually, especially the Jamal Adams scenario with how guys get traded now more frequently. So I wanted to ask, during your time period, you've gotten the opportunity to cover three really, truly unique personalities at head coach with
Yeah.
Rex Ryan, with Todd Bowles, and with Adam Gase.
Yeah.
Rex Ryan obviously seems to thrive in front of the media, revels in the opportunity to answer questions, to show off his charismatic self. Very, very different philosophically than somebody like Todd Bowles, who was much more quiet here. Maybe his tenure didn't work here as a head coach necessarily, but I'm thinking the fact that he just won a Super Bowl as a defensive coordinator with the Buccaneers, maybe he'll have the opportunity to earn himself a second opportunity to be a head coach in the NFL somewhere, I would think. And then you have Adam Gase, who from the very first press conference that he had, which turned into somewhat of a meme in Jets fan circles, and I should know that because I was one who shared it a bunch. From the get-go, it just seemed like he was kind of, and there was maybe not a disconnect, but there was something off there regarding how he handled the media and how he transitioned between dealing with his team and his coaches and the media itself. So what was it like covering all three of those different personalities?
Yeah, and I caught the tail end of Mangini because I filled in a lot. I did backup a lot from when Mangini was the coach. For Mark Cannizzaro was the beat writer then, and in 2008, Mark had a health issue where I covered. If you remember, I'm sure you remember the Thursday night win with Favre over the Patriots. I took over the beat that day for the rest of the 2008 season. So they beat the Patriots, they beat the Titans, and they collapsed.
Right.
And I was at the game where they lost to the Broncos in the cold, in the rain. That was probably the most miserable game I've ever been to in my life.
Yeah, that was the beginning of the collapse. And then I covered the hiring of Rex, and I covered the drafting of Sanchez, and then Mark came back for 2009. But so I was around a lot of, it's the hardest part for me with coaches is I don't feel like a lot of times fans get to know who they are from press conferences. They're too guarded. Rex is the lone exception. Rex was who you saw he was up there. Sometimes Rex put on a show. Sometimes it was a little bit, he would go over the top. But Rex, for the most part, the guy you talked to in a press conference was the same guy you talked to. We were more cursing outside of press conferences, but the same guy you talked to outside of press conferences. The other guys were not like that at all. I begged Todd several occasions. I told Todd I thought he could help himself if he just showed a little more personality. I know I wasn't the only one. A few people said, just show more personality, Todd. Like, it just, no one seemed to get to know him. Todd is a really like funny guy and a really nice guy, and he would just be so dour in these press conferences and so, tight-lipped that I felt like no one got to know him. Now Todd's philosophy was it doesn't matter. His philosophy was I'm just here to win games. I'm not here to be a personality, and which is fine. And I've heard that from a lot of people, but if you don't win, it helps to have a little personality in this town, and you can maybe hold on a little bit longer if you're liked. With Adam, same thing. Adam Gase, the guy you saw, the public perception and who Adam is like really different. Adam is a really funny, good, nice guy, good guy to talk to. But like I get a lot of people are like, "Oh, you must be happy you don't have to cover Gase anymore." I'm like, no, he was actually very good with the media. Like Adam, what he did, like if you watch his press conferences, Adam gave good answers. The first press conference was a disaster. Like throw that aside. He whatever happened that day happened. But I'm talking about if I'm writing a feature on Foley Fatukasi and I need to quote about him, and I ask Adam, in August about Fatukasi, he'll give me a long answer about what he's done well. Todd would never do that. Todd did not want to praise players, other than he would praise Jamal sometimes, but he was very reluctant to, especially in the summer or the spring. He would kind of just it's training camp, it doesn't matter. So Adam was good in that regard, which that is a big part of the job. It's you need quotes for these stories, and if the head coach won't, talk about his players, it gets tough. So I always felt bad that there's this disconnect with fans and the perception of the coaches, and I try in some stories to help that and try to show their personality a little bit, because I think you're painting, you need to paint the full picture of the person, but it's hard. The way, and it's changed so much now in that you can watch the press conferences as fans, if you want to go on Jets.com every day and watch these press conferences, you watch them. And especially this year on the Zoom, I thought a lot of context was lost because you couldn't hear us laughing. There was some times where Adam would joke this year and I knew he was joking and I would be laughing, or Rich Samini, he would sometimes interact with Rich Samini, and I knew Rich, he had a joke, he would joke with Rich, and then I would look and it was become a thing, and people were tweeting about it or whatever, it was some kind of conflict, and it wasn't that. So yeah, it's tough to get these guys to open up and be themselves, because they're also speaking to their teams in press conferences, and they're always conscious of that too.
Have you figured out yet who was calling the offensive plays for the Jets this past season? I know that was a big thing. Maybe that was lost on Zoom.
Yeah, so Gase called them until the Buffalo game in October, I think, right? And then so Dow called basically every play in the Buffalo game. And I think they kind of figured out this is a little silly. Gase has called a lot of plays in his career. He should be helping. So what they were doing was, let me try to remember this exactly. Dow would call first and second down. Gase would call third down. Gase would also do the 2-minute drives, just because they felt like he had more experience in those, and it was a little bit quicker paced calling the plays. And I think Dow had struggled with that. If you remember the Buffalo game, the second half, they got 6 yards. And so I don't know exactly when the changeover. I think Adam did a little bit more. I think Dow called Kansas City too. And then after that, I think the New England game, Adam started calling more. And then it was noticed in the Chargers game. That's when who made a big deal about it? Rich Gannon or somebody made a big deal about it in the broadcast. But yeah, and they, it just became, it was a silly story.
Right.
It didn't matter who was calling the plays. Exactly. Offense stunk regardless, So, and that's what, you hit on, Joe. You talked about Todd Bowles. What gets me is the focus on the coaches is just too much to me. It's about the freaking players. It is about the players. That's one thing I've learned covering football for a while now is Rex Ryan was a good coach when he had good players. Rex Ryan was not a good coach when he did not have good players. He didn't change, So Todd Bowles didn't suddenly learn how to call defense again. He's got Devin White and Ndamukong Suh, Antoine Winfield Jr., Levante David, JPP. He's got players on that defense. Who the heck did he have with the Jets?
Right.
Terrible. So, And Gase did not do a good job here. I'm not gonna say he did, but he also look at his roster.
Terrible.
Atrocious.
Right.
I don't know what people expected. And Robert Saleh is gonna face the same thing unless they really upgrade the talent here. He's gonna struggle. Bill Belichick would struggle here with his talent, So it's about the players, and everyone focuses on the coaches, especially I feel like in football more, coach and quarterback, but it's really about the players.
What are the most memorable press conferences, introductory or firing, that you've covered?
Just introductory or firing, because there was the Idzik midseason press conference.
Oh yes, that was a good one too.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I got actually most memorable press conference is just Jets. You talking about?
Jets or Yankees?
I didn't cover many big ones with the Yankees that were memorable. The Jets one, the Idzik one, was memorable.
That was great.
In there, you were just counting the minutes, and you could feel it in the room. This guy is he's losing it, and then it's always funny to see the reaction when you get back to we have these little offices at the building, and I saw Francesa had been killing him that day, and the reaction. So that was memorable. Rex Ryan's introductory press conference was very memorable. That was holy cow. I was making jokes during Saleh's press conference about scoring the different press conferences through the years, and Rex's was a blowout. Rex was a blowout. So that was memorable. The when Gino got punched, that was that was not a scheduled press conference. That, if I remember correctly, the timing, we were there, and they were supposed to practice at 1:00, and then Todd Bowles was going to speak after practice. And all of a sudden, Todd came in at 10-1 with the PR director, and they were guys, coach has something to say. And that doesn't happen. There's not spur of the moment press conferences. And I remember I said, "Do I need my recorder?" And the PR guy said, "Oh, no, you're all right." And then Todd looked at me and goes, "You need your recorder." And I'm I don't want to record this. And then he told us, the whole Gino got punched story, which was that was one where I was you have to formulate the questions in your head quickly, because it's holy cow, this is really happening. That was memorable. What other ones that I can think of? The Gase one, the introductory press conference, I remember being in the room. I didn't realize what was going on with his eyes in the room. It didn't really stand out to me. I just thought he didn't have great answers to the questions that day. That was what stood out to me. Then you get back to the room. I actually got a text from someone I work with who said, "What's up with his eyes?" And that was my first clue, was "Oh boy, what's going on?" Then we got back to the room. We got to the media room, and everyone was like, "Did you see this? Did you see this?" And then the taco meme and all the other stuff was out, and it was oh my gosh, then you got to figure out how you're going to handle it, professionally, which was tough. So those are probably the most memorable. Oh, and Rex turning sideways was a memorable one too, after Sanchez got hurt. So, but those are probably the most memorable ones.
Lots of characters there. Now, when you're writing a story, who have been your go-to players over the year to go to?
For quotes?
Yes.
Oh, I mean, there's been a lot of them. Damian, a lot of them are on TV now. Damian Woody was a great guy when he was on the Jets to talk to. Brandon Moore was an underrated guy. He was good to talk to. Sanchez was guarded, but toward the end he got a little bit better. Trying to think, more recent vintage. Josh McCown was fantastic. Josh could explain things to you, and he was very, very good. Jordan Jenkins is a good guy on the team right now to talk to. Steve McClendon, Willie Colon comes to mind. It's usually the linemen are very good talkers. They're very good at explaining things. Demarius Thomas wasn't here very long, but he was a pretty good guy to talk to. That's what this year was tough, because you just couldn't walk up to a guy's locker and ask him for help with stuff. It was very formal on Zoom. There's a lot of informal parts of this job where, you're kind of "Hey, what happened on this play? Can you explain this defense to me?" And guys will talk that through with your locker, and we didn't have that at all this year.
I know outside of 2015, that 10-6 season, there hasn't really been a lot of big time success with the Jets over the course of the past 10 years. But there are any games or any other moments out there that stand out to you that you either enjoyed covering or that were your most memorable to cover?
Well, I mean, here's the thing: people get a little lost on. Like sometimes the losses are better to cover than the wins. Now it's getting old. Like I'll say that it is getting old. Like covering losing seasons with this team is getting tiring. Because what's the best stuff to cover is the unexpected stuff, right? Like that's like what gets you excited, what gets your juices flowing. There hasn't been much unexpected with this team in a while, but like, them beating the Rams, well, that was crazy this year. That was interesting. I mean, I wasn't there, so that was a tough one. But in terms of games that I've covered that are very memorable. I mean, the game when the butt fumble happened was a very memorable game. I don't even realize that moment was big, but like
Thanksgiving night.
yeah, they
Prime
just
time.
destroyed and they gave up all these points in the second quarter. Like that felt like the end for definitely for Mike Tannenbaum, and I thought he maybe even for Rex Ryan that night. So that was a memorable one. The Tebow game in 2011 was incredible when he beat them. I thought the stadium was going to collapse. It was so loud that night. There's ones in hindsight that you laugh at now, but like Geno in Atlanta on Monday night when he won that game in 2013, you felt like, oh my God, like the Jets have found their quarterback because he played great that night. I didn't go as crazy as some of my colleagues that night, but that was a memorable one. Them getting destroyed in Detroit, I remember by the Bills after the blizzard in Buffalo. I don't know why that one stands out in my memory. And then 2015, the Patriots overtime game was huge, and then obviously the Bills game. I knew right away when they lost that Bills game. I was like, this is one that's going to haunt them for a while. I didn't know maybe it'd be this long, but I remember I told Mike McCagnon a few weeks after that game, I'm like, you have no idea how bad that loss was. And he was like, well, what do you mean? And I was like, you make the playoffs there and everything changes. There's no playoff drought. I was like, even if you lose in the first round, there's no playoff drought. And now you've made the playoffs your first year. I'm like, now you don't have that. And who knows when you're going to get back there. And it ended up, they still haven't gotten back even to that point. So
Right.
that was a memorable game. The last few years, Sam's first game in Detroit was memorable. But other than that, the last few years, it's a few here and there, but nothing major that stands out.
So I also wanted to ask you because Nick and I are looking to have a certain Adam shine on here in the future. So how did the whole Cosmos thing start with him?
I don't even remember. Adam, it's funny because Adam was a guy who, I told you I kind of took over 2008 for a while, and I covered that Super Bowl. And I remember I met Adam in Tampa. The Super Bowl was in Tampa, in the gift shop of our hotel, and he introduced himself to me, and just told me that like he enjoyed my writing and thanked me, and I was like, wow, it was a weird. I'd never gotten that from a radio TV guy before, and so I don't know, like Adam and I he just started tweeting that, and we kind of had some fun tweets back and forth of like when Wayne Hunter, we used to do the Wayne Watch hashtag. These are kind of like the early days of Twitter, I feel like, but we did the Wayne Watch hashtag whenever Wayne Hunter would have a bad game. And then I used to laugh. The Jets always talked about Vlad Ducasse, right? Who ended up having a nice career for himself. But Vlad Ducasse was this guy when I first came on the beat where I would watch him and I'm like, this guy is not very good. And they would always talk him up. And like Rex was just classic with this, just talking a player up. Like Rex, I think, thought he could convince the player he was good by telling us he was good. So like Rex would just talk up Vlad this one training camp. He just wouldn't stop. So I started calling it the Summer of Vlad. And I did this hashtag Summer of Vlad. And Shine loved that. So Shine picked up on that. So we just kind of had this like Twitter bond. And I'm not sure when Cosnos started, but yeah, he started that at some point, which is funny. Sometimes I know, sometimes I don't.
And how do you feel about the whole radio TV aspect of your job now? Because I think 20, 30 years ago, people like you were taking jobs, newspaper jobs, and focusing on solely on writing stuff for the newspaper and conducting interviews and stuff. Now all these press conferences, they're streamed. As soon as the stuff happens, you're asked to do the radio hits, like we mentioned with WFAN. TV writers go on. The post writers go on TV now. Whether it's maybe local here on NBC, all the local channels do it. So how has that part, of the digital media world and the changes affected you?
Oh yeah, it's affected me a lot. I mean, I've kind of been. I graduated college in 1998. So right, so like I can remember my college newspaper introducing our website in 1996. Right, so I was right there, like when the internet was starting, and you could kind of sense that this was going to be a big part of the job at some point, and it has evolved over the years. Now I do a podcast. During mostly during the season, we do some during the off season. So that's different. And yeah, it's like when I first got into it, all I wanted to do was write. I never thought about anything else. I've kind of tried to embrace the radio aspect of it and the podcasting aspect of it. I don't mind that. I mean, I have a face for newspapers, so I don't think I'm gonna be a TV star anytime soon. But I'm fine going on TV. I go on with Bruce Beck every once in a while. I've been on plenty of other shows in New York, and I was on. The only time I was on SportsCenter was the day Gino got punched. That's also something I remember about that day. Uh, so yeah, it's different. It's definitely different. And I think the biggest thing that changed my job though was Twitter more than the radio. Because the radio thing, you go do it. It's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you're done. Twitter just changed the job completely because Twitter made this a 24-hour job. And free agencies in a month, I'll be sleeping with my phone in my hand, and because it's like stuff will happen and you have to react to it. And so that's I can remember 2 years ago, the Jets. I was up all night basically, and the Jets signed C.J. Mosley at like 6 a.m. It came out, and you have to. So like that, I can't remember who reported it. You have to chase it down, confirm it, then write it for the website. You're writing, then you're working all day on stuff. Then they signed Le'Veon Bell at 12:30 that night. So I'd been writing. I wrote at 6 a.m. I wrote a story, and then at 12:30 I was writing the Le'Veon Bell story. And so like the days like that didn't really exist, I don't think, in 1988, because if somebody signed at 12:30, you didn't find out about it till the next day. So it's different. I've talked to guys who covered back then, and there was different challenges because Twitter's also a blessing in that I don't wake up and read about Le'Veon Bell signing somewhere, that I got beat on the story. You find out about it, you confirm it in 15 minutes if someone beats you to it. So that's part of it is a blessing, but there's also the curse of just 24-hour nature of news now.
Yeah, in the old days, it was Mosley in the early edition and Bell in the late edition. But yeah. No, I think you've done a really terrific job with all your opportunities, and we really appreciate you coming on. We had a lot of fun with you here. We hope to have you on again in the future. Big Jets off season coming up. Hopefully you're right in the sense that the organization does get Sal the help that he's going to need to succeed. Luckily, they have a lot of draft picks in tow. They have a lot of cap space. Definitely questions regarding some players on the roster, including Sam Darnold, but I think those will be answered within short order, hopefully here within the next month or two as we head into free agency and the draft. But Brian Costello, thank you for coming on with us. What we do is we always give our guests here the last word. So if there's anything else you would like to share or promote on your own, go ahead. The floor is all yours. Thanks again for coming on and doing this. We had a lot of fun. We hope to have you on again in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I don't really have anything to promote, but I think the next 2 months you're gonna get a lot of the answers you're looking for, Jets fans. But be patient. I also think turn on the TV now and it's Deshaun Watson every single day. Like that Deshaun Watson thing isn't shaking out for a while. So I think it's gonna take a little bit. So just settle in and enjoy it. And you're like you said, they're well positioned right now. They got a lot of draft picks, a lot of cap space. Now they've got to execute that and find some good players, which that's kind of been the problem the last few years. But Douglas has positioned them well, and now he's got to execute the plan and actually land the players.
So that's going to do it here for this episode of I'm Right for our special guest, Brian Costello. Of course, you could check out his work with the New York Post and his podcast as well. For my co-host, Joe Calabrese, I am Nick Durst, and this has been I'm Right.